Come and Play with Me by Omar Cuellar. The year was 1985. Back then I was 15 years old. I lived in Montpelier, Vermont, a small, quiet town where the winters were long and the nights seemed endless. My house sat on a narrow street lined with bare trees, and my room on the second floor had a large window overlooking the backyard. I was an only child, something that always weighed on me a little. My parents worked too much, and I spent a lot of time alone, reading comics or listening to rock tapes on my old Walkman. That window was my connection to the outside world, my frame for watching the stars or the snow falling silently. But that October night, when it all began, the window became something more, a doorway to the unknown. I saw him for the first time under the pale moonlight. He was a boy, or so he seemed, standing in the yard, still as a statue. His skin was so white it almost glowed, as if made of porcelain, and his eyes, large and dark, stared straight at me. He wore old clothes, a tattered coat and oversized pants, as if he'd pulled them from a forgotten trunk. I froze, my hands trembling as I held the half-open curtains. Then he raised a bony hand and made a slow gesture, inviting me outside. His voice, faint but clear, cut through the glass. "Come play with me." I didn't respond. I shut the curtains and dove under the covers, my heart pounding like a drum. The next night, he returned. He appeared in the same spot, as if he'd never left, and repeated the same words, "Come play with me." His tone was soft, almost pleading, but there was something about it that set my nerves on edge. It wasn't just his sickly pallor or the way his lips barely moved when he spoke. It was a deeper feeling, as if he didn't belong to this world. I watched him from my bed, hiding behind the curtains, and though I didn't answer, he didn't move. He stood there, motionless in the cold, until dawn erased him like a dream. But I knew he wasn't a dream. The nights went on like that, one after another. Every time darkness fell, he was there, outside my window, with that invitation that never stopped sounding strange. At first, I tried to ignore him. I turned up my music, switched off the lights, even told my mom about it. But she just said it was my imagination and told me to stop reading so many horror stories. My dad, ever practical, checked the yard one morning and found no footprints in the snow. "It's just the wind moving the branches," he said, but I knew it wasn't that. He was there, real and persistent, and little by little I started getting used to his presence. Over time, my fear mingled with curiosity. One night, instead of hiding, I went to the window and looked at him closely. His eyes were like bottomless wells, but they didn't seem cruel, just empty. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking a little. He didn't answer directly. He just tilted his head and said, "I'm your friend. Come and play with me." I didn't open the window, but I stayed there, watching him. There was something sad about him, as if he were as trapped in that yard as I was in my room. It was the first time I didn't feel so afraid. That's how our strange friendship began. Night after night, we talked through the glass. He told me odd things, stories of dark, cold places where the stars sang and the sky was black as ink. I told him about my life, school, how I hated math class, my dream of owning an electric guitar. He never asked my name, and I never learned his, but it didn't matter. It was as if we understood each other without needing those things. I grew accustomed to seeing him there, pale and still, like a shadow that appeared just for me. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking about him during the day. Where did he come from? Why was he so pale? Once, I asked if he was sick, and he just smiled, a small, crooked smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not sick," he said. "I'm just different." That intrigued me even more. I started sketching him in my notebook, scribbles of his thin figure under the moon, and imagining what games he might want to play if I ever dared to go out. But something always held me back, a knot in my stomach, a voice in my head saying, "Don't trust him." Weeks passed, maybe months. Winter grew harsher, and the cold fogged the window with every word we exchanged. He never seemed to feel it. His bare hands didn't tremble, and his breath didn't cloud the air. One night, he brought me something, a shiny black pebble he left in the snow below the window. "For you," he said. The next day, I picked it up from the yard. It was cold as ice but smooth to the touch. I kept it on my desk, and for some reason, having it near made me feel more connected to him. Our friendship grew, but there was always a barrier: the window. He never tried to come in, and I never dared to go out. Yet every night he asked the same thing: "Come play with me." His voice was like a song, a melody that wormed into my head and made me waver. I started wondering if I was being unfair, if maybe he was just lonely like me. My parents didn't notice anything. To them, I was still the same quiet kid. But inside, something was changing. One night, as thick snowflakes fell, I stared at him longer than usual. His eyes glowed under the moonlight, and for the first time, I felt like he truly understood me. "Why don't you come inside?" I asked. He shook his head. "I can't. You have to come out." There was an urgency in his voice I hadn't heard before, and it scared me, but it also moved me. Maybe, I thought, he just needed a real friend, someone to take the first step. I decided I would do it. One afternoon, while my parents watched TV downstairs, I put on my thickest coat, a scarf, and boots. My heart pounded, but there was excitement too. I wanted to meet him up close, to touch him, to see if he was as cold as he looked. I talked to him so many nights, shared so much with him, that it felt like time to break that barrier. I looked at the black pebble on my desk and squeezed it in my hand, as if it gave me courage. I crept downstairs quietly, avoiding my parents' notice. I slipped out the back door, and the icy air hit my face. The yard was dark, lit only by the moon and the glow from my window. There he was, waiting for me, paler and more real than ever. He smiled, and for a moment, all my fear melted away. "You came," he said, his voice clearer without the glass between us. I took a step toward him, then another, the pebble still in my pocket. When I was just a few feet away, something changed. His eyes grew darker, deeper, as if they were swallowing the light around them. His smile twisted, and I saw that his teeth were sharp, too sharp for a child. "Let's play," he said, but now his voice was a low, inhuman growl. I stepped back, but it was too late. He moved fast, faster than I could imagine, and his hands, cold as death, gripped my arms. The air filled with a strange smell, like metal and rot. His body began to change. His pale skin split open, revealing something black and slimy beneath, and his arms stretched into tendrils that wrapped around me. I screamed, but the sound was lost in the snow. He wasn't a boy, he never had been. He was something else, something old and hungry, something that had waited patiently all those nights. I felt a sharp pain as his teeth, or whatever they were, sank into my shoulder. My vision blurred, and the winter's cold mixed with the chill of his essence. As he devoured me, I glimpsed fragments of his true form, a writhing mass of shadows and eyes, a being that didn't belong to this world. In my mind, a strange, foreign word echoed: Isnich. I don't know how I knew it, but it was his name, or the name of his kind. My legs gave out, and I collapsed into the snow, which turned red beneath me. The last thing I saw was my window, the warm light of my room, so close yet so far. He or it loomed over me, no longer pretending to be a boy but revealing its true shape, a cosmic predator, a nightmare creature that had played with me the way I played with my comics. I'd been its prey all along. The pebble slipped from my hand, rolling into the snow. As my consciousness faded, I thought of all those nights talking to him, how he'd fooled me with his soft voice and stories. He wasn't my friend. He never had been. He was a hunter, and I was a fool who'd opened the door to the unknown. The snow kept falling, covering my body, or what was left of it. Inside the house, my parents heard nothing. The TV droned on, oblivious to what had happened in the yard. Montpelier would wake the next day as if nothing had changed, but I'd be gone. The Isnich vanished into the night, satisfied, perhaps waiting to lure another lonely child in some other house. I never learned where he came from or why he chose me. Maybe he'd always been there, lurking in Vermont's shadows, a relic from a time before ours. Or maybe he came from farther away, those dark places he spoke of, where the stars sing and the sky is black. All I know is that my curiosity was my undoing. If anyone finds this, if anyone ever reads my story, heed my warning: don't look out the window when the night is too quiet. Don't speak to what you don't understand. There are things in this world, or beyond it, that don't seek friendship but something far worse. I learned that too late. My name doesn't matter anymore. I'm an echo now, a memory swallowed by the snow and the night. He invited me to play, and I was foolish enough to accept. Don't make my mistake. That night, the yard was empty again. My bedroom window stayed open to the world, but there was no one left to look through it. Only silence remained, and maybe, in some other house on some other night, he'd appear again, pale and patient, searching for someone else to play with.